Hello everyone, Shemai Paub, and today I'm taking a look at a brand new lens from Venus Optics, which is designed for Sony's mirrorless cameras, full frame or APS-C. It's the Laowa 15mm f2 FE0D, which has also been given the interesting moniker D-Dreamer. I'd like to thank Venus Optics for loaning me an early production copy of this new lens for testing, although as usual this is a totally independent review. It's a totally manual lens as well, manual focus, manual aperture control, and the retail price when it comes out will be about $850 US, and it will not work on digital SLR cameras at all, only Sony mirrorless cameras. So, this new lens has a few unique selling points. What jumps out at first is its especially fast maximum aperture of f2, which is very bright for such an ultra-wide angle lens. That will especially help you to shoot in dark conditions, and it will give you somewhat out of focus backgrounds too, useful for video making. You could shoot in 4K at a nice wide angle and then crop in and out of your footage, something I love to do, and still get a nice effect. The lens's optics are also designed to project almost no distortion, something unusual for an ultra-wide angle lens. We've seen this before in the Laowa 12mm f2.8 lens for digital SLR cameras. It also has a very close minimum focus distance of only 15 centimeters. And finally, it's relatively compact. For an ultra-wide angle full-frame camera lens with a fast aperture, it's not too big. I love small lenses, and I also love wide-angle lenses with fast apertures, so this has been really enjoyable for me to test. It has excellent, solid build quality, and it looks pretty nice cosmetically too. It's made of metal, finished with brushed black paint, and the aperture and focus markings are etched into the body. It weighs just over 500 grams, so it will balance well on Sony's larger, full-frame mirrorless cameras. As I mentioned, it's a fully manual lens. The main control is the focus ring, which turns smoothly and precisely and has a hyperfocal scale beneath it. The lens's aperture ring is clever. It gently clicks down one f-stop at a time from f2 down to f22. However, there is a handy switch on the side that lets the aperture ring turn smoothly, which will be a good feature for some video makers. It's a great idea to give people the option. Some more good news is that the lens has a metallic filter thread, 72mm wide, so landscape photographers will appreciate the easy use of conventional filters. It comes in a nice presentation box, like all of Venus's more expensive lenses, and with a small metal lens hood too. Overall, it's a fantastic lens to handle. How about image quality though? I've borrowed a Sony A7Rii II camera for this test with its very demanding 42 megapixel full frame sensor. At the widest aperture of f2, the lens is fantastically sharp in the middle of the image with very good contrast. Over in the corners of the image, we can see that, on a 42 megapixel camera, they're a bit softer with a little colour fringing, but they're not too bad. Stop down to f2.8 for a tiny improvement, f4 for a more noticeable one, and at f5.6 and f8 those corners are sharp. They stay sharp now even when the lens is topped down to f22, although the colour fringing remains. Overall, it's hard to criticise the Laowa lens's optics when you consider it's performing on such a high resolution camera. It's incredibly sharp in the middle of your images, delivering a very punchy picture, and the corner image quality is good for such a fast aperture, wide-angle optic, but the aperture does need to be stopped down a bit for best results in those corners. This lens is also an attractive option for owners of APS-C cameras, so let's give it a quick test on my Sony A6300 with its 24 megapixel APS-C sensor. At f2, the lens remains impressively sharp in the middle with excellent contrast. The corners look a little sharper than they did on full frame now. They're still a little softer than the middle, but really not bad at all. There are small improvements at f2.8 and f4, but at f5.6 and f8 they become very sharp. f11 is still great, but at f16 and f22 the effects of diffraction begin to kick in and soften the image. Overall, it's a very good performance, especially on a 24 megapixel sensor. The APS-C sensor can yield a slightly sharper image through it. Alright then, distortion and vignetting on a full frame camera. The distortion performance, as advertised, is excellent. There is just a touch of barrel distortion which is barely noticeable. At f2, there's some quite strong vignetting in the corners, although it falls softly across the image frame, so it's not too noticeable. At f2.8, it's about the same, and there are more noticeable improvements at f4 and f5.6. But even if you stop down further, you'll always have a little vignetting to deal with on a full frame camera. How about close-up image quality? As I mentioned, the lens can focus very closely for such a wide-angle optic, which is an enormously fun little feature, and a bit of the hallmark of Venus Optics lenses. The good news is that, even with the aperture wide open at f2, the close-up image quality remains fantastically sharp in the middle of your images. Let's see about how the lens works against bright lights. This is normally a major weakness of Venus Optics lenses, but they must be doing something right now, as this 15mm lens holds on to its contrast very well and shows minimal flaring even with the brightest light in the image frame. That's an important quality for such a wide-angle lens. When I have time, I like to test lenses for chroma. The Venus 15mm f2 naturally lends itself very well to astrophotography, although on the night that I had both the lens and the camera, there was a full moon brightening the sky, annoyingly. Anyway, at f2, the middle of the image looks great, but we can see some chroma smearing in the corners. It remains at f2.8, but it's greatly reduced at f4. And finally, bokeh. On the whole, your out of focus backgrounds with this lens will look pleasingly smooth, as you can see here, although there can occasionally be a touch of edginess in the brightest points of light. Overall then, the Laowa 15mm f2 is a really nice and practical lens to handle, which can deliver some very punchy images. It has a couple of weaknesses. Its corners could be a little sharper at wide apertures on full frame, and its chroma problem is a little disappointing. But its sharpness otherwise, and excellent contrast, minimal distortion, good work against bright lights, great build quality and close focus ability, all add up to make it a really attractive package for anyone using a Sony mirrorless camera, APS-C or full frame. It's a great option for anyone really, so long as you're happy with manual focus, which is easy enough on such a wide angle lens, and accordingly, I'm very happy to say that it comes recommended.